Laura, I notice a long-standing newscast tradition returns this week, which is that there's no Adam Fleming because he's on his holidays. I've got an upgrade to the actual studio.
What, you mean we let you out the cupboard?
Yeah, the cupboard is shut, and there's loads of news about.
Yes, there always seems to be, just in time for Thursday. Even if you think at the beginning of the week, oh, it's a bit quiet, what are we going to have to talk about late on Thursday night? Well, it doesn't feel like that right now, does it?
Exactly. So, yeah, Adam's tradition, throughout the Brexit cast process, he would go skiing or whatever, and poof, there'd be a load of news.
Gadding around.
And here we are on Thursday night with talk of, quote-unquote, levelling up, big conversation, this whole question about how you go about putting us off unhealthy food and how much should a government intervene in all that kind of stuff.
We'll talk only last week we were talking about Hawaiian pizza.
Well,
exactly. Maybe they heard that.
Tax on pineapple chunks. And of course, after the football, not just the disappointment for so many England fans, but all of the questions that have swirled around race this week. So plenty to talk about on Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
So it's Chris, actually in the proper studio.
And how lovely to be with you in the studio, but still 2 metres apart.
Indeed. Let's talk to our first guest, Bim Afalami, Conservative MP, joining us from the other Newscast studio. Hello, Bim.
Hi, how are you doing?
Not so bad. How are you? Thanks for joining us. Loads to talk to you about, as I say. We can talk about levelling up, and we certainly will in a bit, and this whole business of food. Actually, do you like pineapple on a pizza?
No, it's wrong. It's bad.
It's wrong. It's bad.
When I'm in charge, I'm going to ban it. It should be banned, legislated for.
Oh, that's policy number one when you're in Downing Street.
Exactly.
Wow, there we go. Well, you've probably just really pleased your Italian constituents. The fine Italians of Hitchin and Harpenden will be delighted to hear that you've committed to banning the humble Hawaiian pizza.
It's a
there we go.
I'm more of a
pledge.
sloppy Giuseppe man from Pizza Express myself. Yeah.
Oh,
they are quite. You've got it. Yeah. You see, whenever I've had one of those, you end up just wearing it, or I do.
Doesn't that happen whenever you have anything to eat, Chris? And other pizza chains are also available, not just the sloppy Giuseppe. Right,
Indeed.
then, serious business.
Bim, first of all, let's talk about the whole fallout since the football on Sunday night, and in particular the racial element of it, the racist abuse that those 3 penalty takers had to wake up to the night after the match before. You're a man of Nigerian heritage. How do you reflect on what's happened in the last few days?
Well, I think that it's very regrettable in one way, obviously, and you know, everybody condemns racist abuse of our footballers, or frankly of anybody, in public life or not, for any reason, and that's not what we are as a country. And if I think back to when I was a kid, like I'm 35, when I was a kid watching England football matches, frankly, racist abuse was much more of a bigger part of things than it is now, and I think it's worth making that point. However, in addition, I think that we need to find a language and find a way of dealing with this issue that is not saying everything's awful, nothing has improved, the country is irredeemably racist, because I just do not believe that's true, and that the evidence doesn't bear it out. But at the same time to say, yes, there's stuff that needs to be improved. There are issues not just with idiots on social media, but there are issues with if you look at management or senior managers in football clubs or the FA, you don't find many black people there. There are various other issues that I think it's worth saying, look, these things need to be looked at in the broader sweep of things, because it's not just what happens on the pitch, it's the whole industry and the whole sector.
But it's also, for some people, particularly on the opposition side, about what happens in Parliament, what happens in government. And, you know, there's been a lot of criticism. Even some Tory MPs have questioned how senior figures in the Tory party have discussed this issue in recent times. And let's just have a listen to the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, who accused Boris Johnson of trying to stoke up what he described as a culture war, which in itself is a controversial term, isn't it, Chris? But this was a really dominant issue at PMQs yesterday. Let's listen.
We can all see what's happened here. The government has been trying to stoke a culture war, and they've realised they're on the wrong side. And now they hope that nobody's noticed. Why else would a Conservative MP boast that he's not watching his own team? Why else would another Conservative MP say that Marcus Rashford spends too much time playing politics when he's actually trying to feed children that the government won't? And why will the Prime Minister refuse time and time again, even now, to condemn those who boo our players for standing up against racism? Mr. Speaker, what is it that this England team symbolises that this Conservative Party is so afraid of?
Now, just if people haven't been following this story sort of developed over the weeks, hasn't it, Chris? Where initially ministers were asked about footballers taking the knee at the beginning of a match to protest against racism and to highlight racism. And Priti Patel and Boris Johnson initially sort of said, "Oh, I'm not going to condemn people," but they did say nobody should boo the players. That position's shifted along a bit in recent times, but that's where this all sort of began to brew. So, Bim, what do you say to that? Because some people, and including in your own party, have been uncomfortable about the government sort of seeming hesitant on this issue.
So I think that the difficulty for this has been for not just senior ministers, but for all MPs, is that when this thing started, it was just about not wanting to try and get involved. So when people asked the question several weeks ago, "Oh, are you going to condemn fans for this? Are you going to condemn fans for that?" I think the instinct of senior ministers was, look, I'm not going to get involved with that. And that's how that came. I think as things developed, look, the Conservative Party needs to fully appreciate and understand that we need to be able to find a language that says that there are particular problems. Not everything is fixed yet in relation to racism, but at the same time, the country is not irredeemably structurally racist and everything is terrible and nothing has improved. Neither of those. So we need to be able to find a reasonable, moderate language that can deal with the problem, but at the same time accept that things have improved and developed. I don't agree with what some of my colleagues may or may not have said in relation to the points you picked out, Lee Anderson and somebody on a WhatsApp group.
He was the MP who said he wouldn't watch the football while players were taking the knee.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know.
Nancy Elphick, the MP for Dover, on the WhatsApp group was talking. Wasn't she, about Marcus Rashford spending more time practicing penalties rather than getting involved in politics?
I think both of those comments were unwise. What I would say is that it is okay for me to say, or you, or either of you to say, I don't necessarily want to take the knee, because that's your choice. But you can also be against racism without taking the knee. At the same time, if somebody does choose to take the knee, we shouldn't criticise somebody for that being their expression of combating racism. Do you see what I mean? I think we need to be able to just be open and moderate about it and accept that people will try and do things in their own way. We shouldn't try and ban one way of doing it. Neither should everybody be forced to take the knee as some sort of demonstration that they're against racism.
So to be specific then, was it unwise of the Home Secretary to so directly avoid, when she was asked, would you condemn those who are booing those who are taking the knee? She very pointedly avoided answering that, saying it was up to them. Was that a mistake?
Well, it's what I was saying at the beginning, which is I just think she didn't want to get into a sort of row about what fans should or shouldn't do.
Because it looked like she was sympathising with those who booed the players.
Well, I mean, anybody who's followed anything to do with this Home Secretary will know that she's been the recipient of pretty nasty stuff in lots of places. And I know you will appreciate that. So I think anybody that thinks that the Home Secretary, and I know her well, thinks that racism or is okay, I think is wrong. But at the same time, I think what this was really born out of, and this is really what this is about, is almost a discomfort around the issue, and therefore politicians just thinking, look, I just don't want to get involved. I don't want to condemn, don't want to do anything. And I think that's really how this became difficult.
But isn't leadership, though, actually really about getting involved? It's about showing empathy. It's about providing leadership to the country. And let's just see also how this was perceived, because it's a very sensitive debate. People have got all sorts of different views. You're suggesting, Bim, it's hard sometimes for politicians to get the tone right.
Yeah.
But also this is about how it comes across to people. And let's just remind people what Tyrone Mings, one of the young English players, put on social media directly to Priti Patel. He said, "You don't get to stoke the fire at the beginning of the tournament by labelling our anti-racism message as gesture politics and then pretend to be disgusted when the very thing we are campaigning against happens." Now, that is a message that seems to be absolutely from the heart. From a young, talented man.
I can't think of a precedent, actually, of such a senior sporting figure directly, unequivocally and publicly taking on such a senior politician as the Home Secretary on such a specific issue where ultimately she has to address it one way or the other?
Well, I think that it was unfair. That's not to say that he doesn't have a right to express the way he feels. I mean, this is ultimately freedom of expression. You know, he's entitled to say that. But the way I look at it is this. The idea that racist abuse came to English football players because of a Home Secretary not necessarily condemning something several weeks ago in an interview is just completely not true. As I say,
but
I remember
they
watching...
noticed it. But isn't the point here, Bim, actually, that people noticed it? And isn't it actually quite patronising to say to people who might be interested in football, oh, well, there's no way that anything that any politician might have said has got anything to do with this? I mean, isn't it actually a bit dismissive?
No, look, I am not disagreeing with you that I think it's shown, the last few days have shown that this has been difficult for certain politicians to manage, and the way it's been perceived, as you said, has been unfortunate in some quarters. Of course it has. And that's why I said at the beginning that we need to be able to, as a party and as individual politicians, make sure we have a reasonable, moderate language that can deal with the nuance. But I don't think it's patronising to also say that I can remember, and I'm a huge football fan, just really pretty severe racism, very openly, in England football matches of time past. You know, look at the 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Matches
and
you were
things
at?
Have not actually as matches I was at. In fact, I suspect it was why when I was very young I wasn't taken. But it has got immeasurably better, and that's not me being complacent. That's not me saying there isn't racism. Obviously, as we've seen after the England match, that there is. But what I'm trying to say is that we now need to find that nuance and say, yes, certain things have improved, but yes, we need to do better in lots of areas.
One last question before we move on to talking about the Prime Minister's speech and levelling up. Just to be absolutely clear, do you think taking the knee is gesture politics?
I think that it can be for certain people at certain times. So, for example, if somebody says, no, because I took the knee, therefore I'm anti-racist and therefore I'm committed to race, and if you don't do it, then therefore you're not. I think that's wrong, because I think that people are allowed to express themselves in their own way. But at the same time, I don't think that everybody who takes the knee is necessarily just doing it for a gesture. Do you see what I mean? So I think that we've got to take a nuanced view on this. Nuance
is very often difficult in this debate.
It is. I try my best.
Strong feeling. Well, thank you very much for trying your best. Really interesting to hear your views on that. Well, there's been, as you said, Chris, tons of news around. Ben, we know that you want to ban Hawaiian pizzas, but the government...
That's the key news line coming up.
That's the key news line for the government's food strategy, with a member of the Dimbleby dynasty setting out ideas for trying to get everybody to be healthier and basically... eat better, be better, and have more salad and have more vegetables and all the rest. But there's been so much around today, hasn't there? And probably the main political event really was the Prime Minister's big speech.
Yeah.
Now, it always makes me wonder, Chris, when anything is ever billed as a big speech.
Yeah.
Quite often sometimes, well, actually, I can't say quite often sometimes, it quite often ends feeling a little bit underwhelming. Now, you've been covering this today. What did you think?
You know what the word I always look out for with these things? Does it include the word keynote?
A keynote major, a big
keynote
significant address.
To be fair, I don't think it did on this, because usually when I see keynote, I think it probably won't be. But yes, the Prime Minister's been in Coventry talking about, quote unquote, levelling up, this big central idea, the most central idea of his premiership, as his spokesman described it today. And I thought he was really, really blunt in its diagnosis, basically saying the UK is, compared with many similar countries, very, very centralised on London, huge inequalities between and indeed within regions. But of course, the challenge he's got, particularly 2 years into being Prime Minister, is how much has he actually done as opposed to diagnosed? How much has he cured? How much treatment has he provided? And there wasn't all that much new detail.
Well, should we have a listen?
Honest. Yeah, good idea.
For too many people, geography turns out to be destiny. Take life expectancy, even before COVID hit. It's an outrage that a man in Glasgow or Blackpool has an average of 10 years less on this planet than someone growing up in Hart in Hampshire or in Rutland. And I don't know what people do in Rutland to live to prodigious ages. Who knows? But they do.
Now, arguably, Chris and Bim, almost any politician over the last 30, maybe 40 years could have made almost exactly those same statements. I dare say that you and I have probably been in a room listening to politicians of different stripes saying almost exactly the same things. But Bim, after more than a decade in charge, why is it that your party still feels the need to be saying these kinds of things when their critics would argue they're responsible for not having done very much to change it over the years, maybe even exacerbate it, some people on the left would claim? What's the point of him spelling this out again without being quite so hot on the solutions?
So, and I say this very gently, the difficulty with a lot of modern media is that it's always asking for new, always needing the new thing. What's the new solution, the new exciting thing? Actually, sometimes the answer to very complex generational problems is doing what we know we need to do and doing it as effectively as possible. So what does that look like on levelling up? Fundamentally, the way I look at this is economic development in certain regions of this country is poor in comparison with, say, London and the South East in particular. Now, part of how over the last 10 years we sought to deal with that is around the devolution agenda, the metro mayors, Greater Manchester, the Northern Powerhouse, all of that sort of thing. That has improved things. The next phase, and I think that that's what the Prime Minister is now looking at, whether it be using the net zero agenda, whether it be looking at the high street strategy, various other things, is to try and bring all these things together to improve the economic sort of productive capacity of the country.
You delivered your admonishment gently but directly, I thought. Quick question, Bim, because I was very struck that the Prime Minister very pointedly addressed the whole notion that levelling up, as he describes it, doesn't mean cutting down the tallest poppies, I think was the phrase he used. In other words, I guess potentially punishing people like your constituents in Hitchin and Harpenden, just outside London, in the broader southeast of England. Do you get people grumbling to you in your surgery saying, God, you lot just bang on about the north of England all the time. What about us?
So I haven't in my constituency, but look, the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, which is, I don't know, it's about 10 miles from my constituency, which is what, by-election we lost recently. I campaigned there a lot. And I did, if I'm very honest, I did hear people say, oh, when you talk about this levelling up, what you mean is using my taxes to go and spend in somewhere up north. And that's why I'm really, really passionate about this. The economic capacity of different regions of the country has to be improved. And that's what the Prime Minister was talking about when he was saying it's good for the South. Because if we improve the economic capacity of other regions of the country, you reduce the pressure, whether it be in terms of housing or infrastructure or services or whatever, in the South East. And that's good for people, it's good for their kids and grandkids. So that's why the economic capacity is the thing that I'll be working with my colleagues and very much looking to the Treasury and the Downing Street for over the coming months as the net zero, or not just net zero, sorry, the levelling up strategy comes forth. Because without that, ultimately, without an economic strategy, we're not going to significantly improve things beyond what New Labour did. So the economics is the key to this, and the way that we do that better is a whole mixture of the things that we all know works. It's infrastructure, which we've committed to, it's R&D spending, and not just putting it in Cambridge and London and Oxford, but bringing it into Manchester and other parts of the country. It's skills, it's infrastructure, all of these things are what we need to do to improve the economic capacity of the country. It's what they've been trying to do in Germany for the best part of 30 years, and we need to, frankly, get a move on.
Well, Bim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We note there that as a Conservative MP from one of the wealthier parts of the South East, noting still that there will be pressure on the Treasury to make sure that plenty of wonga ends up in your part of the world. But thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. Interesting, Chris. Bim mentioned there the idea of devolution and mayors and people having more say. Guess what? Two of the prominent mayors of England have been listening to that conversation and are joining us now. Andy Street, the Metro Mayor of the West Midlands, and Tracy Brabin, the newly-ish elected Mayor from West Yorkshire. Thank you both so much indeed for joining us tonight. Now, Andy, you were in the audience at the Prime Minister's speech today, weren't you? Now, I know that you are a loyal Conservative, but you're also someone who will always bang the drum for your part of the world. What did you make of it?
You're quite right on all those counts, Laura. Just to say, I didn't hear the conversation with Bim. We were sitting in silence, so I can't comment on what went before. But the last bit of what I heard him say was spot on. that this ultimately is about the economics. And I think the most important thing that I took from today is where the event occurred, because it's actually symbolic of levelling up in action. So many people say, what's it all about? So let's just explain that to your listeners. It was at this new battery industrialisation centre in Coventry. And that is all about the West Midlands, in this case, becoming the centre of this new industry, a place where lots of jobs will be created in cutting-edge technology. And the symbolism of choosing to talk about it there was so important. And the honest point that I thought the Prime Minister called out really clearly is jobs in battery technology in the West Midlands are good for Britain, and there's nothing lost by the South East in that. So actually, you can still see an incredibly vibrant London, but there will be some things, and by the way, they'll be different in the West Midlands to in West Yorkshire, where the West Midlands can step up and play its full part. And that was the message of today, and that I agree with wholeheartedly.
When you say, Andy, I don't know if people in the West Midlands come up to you in the street and say, what is levelling up? Maybe that's the exclusive preserve of nerdy political journalists. But if and when people do that, I know you kind of had a go at it just there, but how in a sentence or two do you answer them? What does levelling up actually physically look like?
Chris, I hate to tell you this, but no one's ever come up to me in the streets and say, what does levelling up really mean, unless they're a journalist. So, but people do come up to me and say, what's all this devolution stuff about? What's all this rebalancing the economy about? What's actually about a more, what's this all going on here? And the answer to that's very straightforward. And I usually say, what we're after is actually that there isn't a big gap in life chances between a child born in Wolverhampton and a child born in London. That actually we get better employment prospects here, more like the opportunities that you have in London. And when you put it in really practical terms, and it all starts with jobs, opportunities, and the skills to get those really good jobs, people then get it. And it's not about a bus or a bridge or a small piece of investment like that. Ultimately, it's about that idea of social mobility. And people say, oh yeah, I see what this is all about now.
Now, Tracy, congratulations in your new role. Welcome to Newscast for the first time as in your new gig. Listening to Andy there, what do you make of that? That all sounded like rather a list of nice promises.
Well, certainly we were very excited in West Yorkshire to hear the Prime Minister finally nail down what levelling up actually meant. And I'm sorry to say, and I disagree slightly with Andy, that it was pretty disappointing. There was lots in there that we knew already. I mean, as West Yorkshire knows that life chances is very tough for some of our communities. A boy born today in one of the wealthier parts of West Yorkshire was more likely to live 11.3 years longer than a boy born in one of the most deprived areas of West Yorkshire. So, of course, it's not just north-south, it's not even city and town, it is about our communities. I must say, I was slightly disappointed. I did feel we were going to get more detail, more long-term funding. We are still in a position, and it hasn't changed from the levelling up speech, where we're bidding against each other in our communities, trying to get those small pots of funding. And of course, as the new mayor, I am absolutely up for working with government. I have written to the new Levelling Up minister. I'm yet to get a reply. So I'm just hoping that that's obviously lost in the post, because it's really important that we work together. And if I could just finally say that Andy and I, we have very lots in common. We were part of the UK 100, and Andy did a brilliant event hosting that. Lots of people, mayors and MPs and stakeholders came together. And one of the things we're asking of government is the powers to deliver for climate change. So I'm sure Andy would agree with me on that part of levelling up is having those powers to go faster and further to deliver for the government.
Tracy, one of the things the Prime Minister talked about in his speech was devolution and the mayoral model of which you are a part, and that being rolled out to counties and not just to cities. I wonder what levers of power you've been able to pull or are looking forward to pulling in your first few weeks and months as West Yorkshire's mayor. Oh, and by the way, I quite like that face mask you had on the other day, which I think was divided up into the different chunks of your region, wasn't it?
That's right. It was made by a councillor for me, and it says "Do it for Yorkshire" inside.
Oh, you have to send one to Chris, Tracy. He'll wear it around the newsroom.
It's my lucky talisman. I would say, having been in opposition for 5 years, it is quite exciting voting to be able to have power and money. So to be able to, in the first few weeks, actually attach budgets to my 10 manifesto pledges. So whether that's 5,000 affordable, sustainable homes, 1,000 jobs for young people, whether that's having an inclusivity champion to bring equality and diversity and inclusion into everything we do, whether that's, tackling the climate emergency, all of those things, we've been able to kickstart, get going, and in the first 100 days we'll have an audit on all of those pledges that 60% of those who voted for me, and that mandate is really powerful, and we're going to make sure that those pledges are kickstarted and we definitely deliver at the end of the 3 years. But just talking about counties, it is not for me to say what they want. This is devolution in action. It's for them to say to government what they want. But I did raise an eyebrow when the Prime Minister said, write to me with your great ideas. I do think the people that work in his office may regret that.
Well, you never know. You might have a very full post bag, I expect. And Tracy, it's great to have you on. And we will have you on definitely in your new role again and see if maybe after your 100 days, see how people who live in your mayoralty, which that sounds very grand, doesn't it? Having a mayoralty, how things have been going. But just as we disappear, because we've got an almost brand new mayor, and actually one of the most experienced metro mayors in the country. Andy, of course, you did the job for a while and then you got re-elected not so long ago. Any last-minute tips for Tracy about the best way of doing the job?
Oh, I would be entirely wrong for me to tell Tracy how to do it, but I will offer one reflection.
A tip.
Yeah, a tip. I will offer a reflection because it's very easy, regardless of party politics, to find yourself sort of opposing what the government do. But we have genuinely found that the best way to do it is to try to find the common ground and to say to government, we're a capability here. We're a sort of resource you should be using. We can make things happen. And back to the point that the conference that Tracy referred to earlier in the week, we hosted the UK 100 conference. That's all about local leaders coming together to say the biggest challenge of all is around climate change. Embrace us, let us do things which are best done locally rather than nationally, and actually help us achieve together. And I think that's the tip I'd offer. That's my experience the last 4 years. It's better when we work with people than work against them.
All peace and harmony in regional politics.
Yeah. It's great to have two mayors on Newscast. It got me thinking, I wonder what the collective noun is for a bunch of mayors.
Oh, I don't know. Any ideas, either of you?
I don't know. A dystopia.
Chain, maybe? A chain of men?
Of course. Very, very good. Well, thank you both for your time tonight. It's been great to have you on. And I hope you both come back another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
A chain of mayors, Chris.
That was well delivered, wasn't it?
Brilliant. Well, she used to be an actress,
Well,
didn't she?
exactly.
There we
that
are.
could have been a line out of Coronation Street, couldn't it? It really could. Former actress and a former High Street. I was trying to avoid saying John Lewis. I just say John Lewis, wasn't he? He used to be a big boss at John Lewis.
Absolutely.
I went all BBC for a minute then.
Well, that was good. It helped me make a bad joke about from one soap opera to another. But there we go. That's probably just about time for us to go.
I think it probably is, isn't it? Adam will be back next week. Oh, and I won't be. So it'll be you and Adam, I think, next week.
It will. And I'll be on Newscast with something special tomorrow. Not the telly one, but just the podcast one. So look out for that. It'll be in your feeds and on the telly too, but not the Newscast telly. But this is all getting very complicated now.
That's what we call a tease. Plenty from Laura tomorrow, from us. Thank you for listening and for watching. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.